You have been fishing for 30 years. You can tie a Palomar knot in the dark standing in a bass boat. And last Saturday, you lost the biggest largemouth bass of your life because of something you have been doing wrong for the last 20 of those 30 years. But here is what stings about that broken line and empty landing net. These are not beginner mistakes. These are the ones only experienced fishermen make because they have been part of your routine so long and they turned invisible. And you are probably guilty of at least 4 of them. Number 7, fishing the same spot every time. This one might ruffle some feathers at the boat ramp, but it needs to be said. If you have hit the same lake, the same stretch of bank, the same bend in the river for the last 10 or 15 years, you are leaving fish on the table and you do not even know it. And look, I get the appeal. You pull your truck into the same gravel lot every Saturday morning. You back the boat trailer into the same launch. You know where the drop-off sits 40 yards out from the big dead oak on the North Shore? You know what the rocky bottom looks like where the channel bends. You know exactly what time the morning sun clears the tree line and where the shade falls along the bank at noon. That is real knowledge that took years to build, and it matters. But there is a trap hiding inside that comfort zone, and it is a trap that catches more veteran anglers than beginners. When you only fish one body of water, you only learn one set of conditions. You stop adapting to new shoreline structure. You stop reading water with fresh eyes. You stop thinking like a fisherman solving a puzzle and start thinking like a person going through the motions of a routine. Anglers who consistently fill their live wells are the ones who put themselves in uncomfortable water. They launch their boat on lakes they have never seen before. They wade into rivers with bottom structure they do not recognize. They get humbled by conditions they were not expecting, and they figure out solutions on the fly. And every single one of those trips teaches them something that sharpens their instincts on their home water too. There is another problem with the same spot habit that nobody at the dock ever brings up. When you only fish one place, you start blaming slow days on the conditions. The barometric pressure was off. The water temperature dropped. The fish just were not biting today. But an angler who fishes 10 different lakes and rivers in a season knows that slow days usually mean you are doing something wrong, because they have seen the same conditions produce a full stringer somewhere else. Your favorite fishing hole is not going anywhere. If that is the only water you are fishing, you stop growing as an angler somewhere around the second presidential term you spent on that same bank. Number 6, not changing the line on your reel. Here is something that should blow the mind of every angler who has spent serious money on fishing equipment. I know guys who will drop $300 on a custom rod, $200 on a high-end spinning reel, $60 filling the live well at the bait shop, and another $80 in fuel getting the boat to the lake. And the monofilament line on that expensive reel has been sitting there since they spooled it up during the last presidential administration. Tournament bass fishermen change their fishing line before every single event they enter. Every one. That might be overkill for a weekend recreational angler heading out to the lake with a cooler of sandwiches, but the principle behind it matters. UV light from the sun degrades monofilament even when you are not using it. Salt water corrodes it. Heat from sitting in a hot garage all summer bakes the memory into the coils. That spool of fishing line sitting on your reel in the garage between trips, hanging on the wall next to your tackle box, is getting weaker by the month without ever touching the water. Here is what that degradation actually looks like when you pull old line off a reel. You will see it holding tight coils that do not straighten out when you strip it through the guides. You will feel stiff spots and soft spots where the line has broken down unevenly. And if you hold a section up to the light, you might see a color shift where the UV has bleached it. None of those are the kind of damage that screams emergency, which is exactly why it goes unnoticed for years. And here is a trick that a lot of veteran anglers with decades on the water never think about. During a typical fishing trip, you are only casting and retrieving with about 25% of the line on your reel. The top quarter, the remaining 75% wrapped underneath on the spool, is basically brand new. So before you spend money respooling entirely, try flipping your line at home. Take the top portion off, reverse it, and put it on the bottom. You just gave yourself fresh fishing line on the business end for $0 and 10 minutes of your time. But anytime you run your fingers along the line coming off your reel and feel a nick, a rough spot, or a section that looks faded and discolored, that tiny imperfection you can barely feel with your thumb and forefinger is the exact point where your line snaps when a big catfish or bass on the other end pulls hard. And you are going to stand there in your fishing boat blaming the fish or blaming the hook. But it was the line. Number 5, tying dry fishing knots. This is the one that costs more catches than almost anything else on this list, and almost nobody standing around the bait shop talks about it. When you tie a fishing knot and cinch it down tight without wetting the line first, the friction of the monofilament or fluorocarbon pulling against itself generates heat. And that heat weakens your fishing line by 20 to 30%. Think about what that actually means the next time you are sitting in your bass boat rigging a line. You are on 20-pound test monofilament, and because you tied a dry knot the same way you always have, your line is now effectively breaking at 14 pounds, maybe less. And the worst part is you cannot see the damage. The knot looks clean. There is nothing visually wrong with it when you hold it up and inspect it. But there is an invisible weak point baked right into the wrap, and it is sitting there waiting for the one fish that pulls hard enough to expose it. Every time you tie a fishing knot on the water, whether you are rigging a Carolina rig, tying on a crankbait, or attaching a leader, wet the line first. Saliva, lake water, river water, whatever is right there. It takes about 2 seconds, and it is the difference between landing a trophy largemouth and watching your favorite lure sail off into the middle of the lake. And while we are standing at the rod holder talking about knots, test every single one before you make your first cast. Grab the fishing line on both sides of the knot and pull firm. If it slips even a tiny bit, if you feel any movement at all, cut it off and tie a fresh one. A 30-second retie on the deck of a bass boat is nothing compared to the story you will be telling at the fish cleaning station about the monster that got away. Number 4, setting the drag wrong on your reel. This is the big one, and it is specifically a problem for anglers who learned to fish decades ago on monofilament line and have since switched over to braided fishing line without adjusting how they set the drag on their spinning reel or bait caster. Here is what happened to an entire generation of fishermen. When most of us learned to fish, sitting on a dock or riding alongside our fathers and grandfathers in an aluminum boat, the advice was simple. Set the drag firm on the reel. When a big fish hits your bait, you want that hook buried deep. And with monofilament fishing line, that approach actually worked fine because mono stretches. That stretch in the line acts as a built-in shock absorber. The fish surges against the rod, the monofilament gives a little, the hook stays set, and everything stays connected. Braided fishing line does not stretch at all. So when you set the drag on your reel the way you always have, the way your dad showed you standing on the bank of whatever pond you grew up fishing, the hook rips right out of the fish's mouth. Or the line snaps at the knot under the rod tip. And you are standing there in the boat thinking it was bad luck or a bad hook. It was not bad luck. The drag on your fishing reel was too tight for braided line. The general rule every rod and reel manufacturer recommends is setting your drag to about 1/3 of your line's breaking strength. So if you are running 30-pound braided line through your guides, your drag should start slipping at about 10 pounds of pressure. Some veteran anglers who understand the zero stretch problem drop the drag even further with braid, down to 15 or 20%. If you want to calibrate it properly, clip a small hand scale to your fishing line with the rod bent at about a 45-degree angle and pull the line through the guides. Adjust the drag knob until the scale reads your target weight while the line is actually moving and the rod is loaded. A lot of guys make the mistake of pulling line straight off the reel face with no rod bend, and that gives you a completely different resistance reading. And here is what really trips up experienced anglers at the boat ramp and on the tournament trail. They know their old drag setting worked for decades of catching bass and catfish and crappie on monofilament, so they assume the problem is something else. The hook is dull. The rod is too stiff. The fish are just not biting right. It takes some anglers 2 full seasons of lost fish and broken lines to realize the issue is the drag setting, because their muscle memory is 20. If you are finding this video helpful and you recognize yourself in any of these mistakes, hit subscribe. I cover fishing tips and techniques every week that are specifically for experienced anglers who want to sharpen their game on the water. Now, this next one is something fishing guides see every single weekend on their boats. Number 3, horsing the fish. There is a particular kind of confidence that comes with decades on the water, and it shows up the second a fish slams your crankbait and the rod tip dips hard. You feel that strike hit the rod tip, you rear back hard to set the hook, and you immediately start cranking the reel handle as fast as your hand will move. And that is exactly how you lose the fish. Pulling too hard on a hooked fish is called horsing, and it is one of the most common mistakes that veteran anglers make on the water every single weekend. The harder you crank and pull the fishing rod in one direction, the harder the fish on the other end of the line fights back in the opposite direction. You end up in a tug-of-war with a bass or a walleye or a striper, and in a tug-of-war with a fish, the hook point anchored in soft tissue is always the thing that gives first. There is actually a consistent pattern that fishing guides on tournament lakes and charter boats see year after year. Lighter-handed anglers who keep their rod tip up and apply steady, patient pressure consistently land more fish than aggressive fighters who... The technique that works on the water is closer to walking a dog on a leash than hauling in a rope on a dock. Keep the rod tip pointed toward the sky. Apply steady, even pressure through the rod blank. When the fish wants to run, let it take line against the drag. When it stops and turns, reel in what you can recover. Coax the fish to the landing net instead of dragging it across the surface. Watch how a seasoned charter captain works a tuna that is circling beneath the boat. As the tuna starts a new turn, the captain adds just a touch of pressure to keep the fish's head slightly up. As it comes around on the circle, he reels in line steadily. When the tuna turns away and pulls, he lets it take a little back. If the fish stays horizontal in the water column, the angler gains more line than he loses on every pass. That patience is the whole game. Especially with species that have soft mouths, crappie and trout and panfish, anything where the hook can tear right through the thin tissue around the jaw. You are pulling the hook right through the fish's lip and blaming it on bad luck when it shakes free at the side of the boat. Your fishing rod and your reel drag system were designed to tire the fish out gradually. Let them do the job they were built for. The fish is not going to out-patience a spinning reel, but it will absolutely outpull your arms if you turn the fight into a brute force contest at the rod tip. Number 2, believing old fishing myths that got passed down through the generations. Most of us learn to fish from someone older sitting in an aluminum boat or standing on a dock. A father, a grandfather, an uncle who took us to the pond behind his house every summer when school let out. And those people learned their fishing knowledge from someone who came before them. And somewhere along that chain of fishermen passing down advice at the cleaning station and the tackle shop, certain ideas became gospel truth that were big fish only eat big baits. You hear that repeated at every boat ramp and bait shop in the country. A 10-pound largemouth bass will absolutely hammer a 4-inch finesse worm or a small shad-colored crankbait if that is what looks natural. Big fish eat whatever is easiest to catch and costs the least energy to chase down. A trophy bass did not get to 10 pounds by being picky about portion size. Fish stop biting when it rains. That one gets repeated every time somebody opens a weather app and sees precipitation in the forecast for Saturday morning. Rain actually activates the bite in a lot of fishing situations. It breaks up the surface of the lake, which makes fish less wary. It washes incepts and small bait fish around in the shallows, which draws predators in close. It cools the water temperature during hot summer months when bass and bluegill are pushed deep by the heat. Some of the best fishing days of your entire career on the water will happen in a steady drizzle with the rain tapping on the hood of your rain jacket. Dawn and dusk are the only times worth fishing. That one has a kernel of truth in it because low light conditions at sunrise and sunset do push a lot of feeding activity in the shallows. But fish and hash per tout, but fish eat throughout the day. The guys who pull their boat onto the trailer and call it quits at 10 in the morning because they have decided the bite window closed are driving past the boat ramp. And here is one more piece of fishing folklore that veteran anglers love to repeat at the dock. If the wind is from the east, the fish bite least.
It is a catchy rhyme that sounds like wisdom, but it is terrible advice by itself. Wind direction matters because of what it does to water temperature and current flow and bait fish movement along the shoreline, not because of some old rhyming saying.
A strong east wind that pushes warm surface water toward a rocky bank is going to stack shad and bluegill against that shoreline, and the bass will follow them right in.
The wind direction is a data point you can actually use, not a verdict on whether the fishing trip is worth taking.
The problem with these fishing myths is not that they are completely wrong. Some of them are partially right, some of the time, on some bodies of water. The problem is treating them as ironclad rules that never bend, no matter what the fish finder and the water temperature gauge are telling you right now on this lake today. The water does not care what your grandfather told you while you were sitting in his John boat. It cares about water temperature, barometric pressure, dissolved oxygen levels, and what the bait fish are doing right now, not what worked at this same lake in 1990.
Getting stuck in your ways and refusing to adapt.
And this is the one that ties every single item on this list together, because every mistake we just walked through on the water has the same root cause growing underneath it. At some point in your fishing career, you found something that worked, and you stopped questioning whether it was still working. Same monofilament line you have always spooled on your reel. Same Palomar knot you have always tied dry. Same drag setting you cranked down 20 years ago. Same parking spot at the boat ramp. Same launch time at dawn.
Same tackle box full of the same lures in the same colors arranged in the same order you have kept them in since you bought that box.
And 10 years ago, that whole routine worked beautifully on the water. You were catching fish consistently. But the fish in your lake changed their patterns. The water levels changed. The vegetation along the bank grew in differently. The bait fish population shifted. The gear technology in the tackle shop moved from monofilament, and you did not change with any of it. You just kept running the same playbook in a fishing boat on water that had already moved on without you. The anglers who stay sharp and keep catching fish after 50, 60, even 70 years on the water are the ones who pull up to the boat ramp. They watch what the younger guys in the bass boats are throwing. Not to copy them, but to understand why a different retrieve speed or a different lure profile is working on this lake right now.
They test a new technique on the water once in a while, even when the old approach is still catching a few fish.
They admit when something in their tackle box is not producing instead of blaming the weather or the moon phase. There is nothing wrong with 40 years of fishing experience.
Experience is exactly what keeps you from making the rookie mistakes that beginners make on every trip. But experience turns into a liability the second it convinces you that you already know everything the water has to teach you.
Try this the next time you load the fishing gear into the truck. Change one thing about your approach, just one. Fish a different depth than your usual target zone. Tie on a lure style you have never thrown before. Set the drag on your reel a quarter turn lighter than what feels natural. Head to a lake you have never launched on. See what happens on the water. If the experiment does not produce fish, you lost nothing but a few hours.
If it does work, you just learned something that 30 years of running the same routine never taught you.
If you have spent 20 or 30 or 40 years on the water, you already know more about reading a lake and working a rod and reel than most people who will ever tie on a hook. The question is whether you are still learning new things on the water. Because the anglers who are still catching fish at 70 are the ones who never decided they had the whole lake figured out.
If this one hit close to home, you will want to check out our video on the 3 strongest fishing knots for modern line, because the knots you learned